VMware Foundations. This is where it all begins. And welcome to class, by the way. To get started, this is what we're going to be going over throughout the rest of the series. This is an overview of the entire class, not including all the labs that go along with these chapters, but these are the chapters we're going to be working through. We're going to start off with some 101 stuff, basically why virtualization, what is virtualization, what it means to virtualize a computer or a switch or a software, things like that. We're going to start off with the basics. Then we're going to jump into working with virtual machines and what that means, and then also a common virtualization or vSphere product called vCenter, and what that guy does and why he's so important. And then we're going to be talking about permissions and storage options and managing a virtual world, migrations and high availability. So how we can do physical to virtual and virtual to physical. Actually, you never really do virtual to physical anymore. It's all physical to virtual. But migrations, long story short, or migrations from former versions of VMware to VMware 5.5, that type of thing. And then also VM utilities and performance that can help you out with your virtual environment. So with that said, let's get started with the VM 101. And in this first chapter, what we're going to be talking about is why virtualization, a little bit about VMware, company overview kind of thing, and then also taking a look at virtual servers versus virtual desktops and the difference thereof. So we'll be talking about that. Also virtual switches or vSwitch and what that guy does for us in our virtual environment. And then storage options we have like SAN or NAS and all the different types of storage we use in a virtual environment. And then also an overview of the network and storage protocols like iSCSI and Fiber Channel over Ethernet. Those are the two by far most common protocols there are out there. They're network storage protocols, and we'll be talking about those as well. So let's get started with the why virtualization. So virtualization is a framework or methodology of dividing the resources of a computer into multiple execution environments. Sounds pretty complex, right? In reality, what we're doing is we're utilizing all of a server's resources, or attempting to anyway. We're making all of the server resources available to multiple machines. So let's go back a bit. Let's go back to the original days of server computing, and let's start off not in the original days, but let's start off in the early days, and let's just like the Windows NT environments. Okay, so with Windows NT, and I'll just write this up there. So we had Windows NT. I was deploying these all the time for K through 12 customers, basically schools and commercial businesses, for network permissions and file sharing and web servers and also DNS and DHP servers and all that kind of stuff that they do. I was deploying them all the time along with Cisco routers and switches early on in my career. And whenever we sold these servers, these were monster servers. And it doesn't really matter about the size of a server whenever you have 3 or 4, because they're going to go in a closet or in a rack or in a server room, things like that. But the thing is that we had, if you wanted a file server, we would size out, the sales engineers would size out a file server, and then they would put however much hard drive space you needed in there, so maybe 50 gigs or something like that, or 40 gigs. It just depends on what your needs were at the time, right? But the file server was just that. It was a file server. Okay, so let's just say one here was for file. And then you needed a print server, something to manage all of the printers in your organization and manage the print queues so you could print to any printer from anywhere. And so, we would size out another server, and that would be your print server. Okay, and then all the print drivers would be installed on that print server, and then everybody could connect to it, that kind of thing. And then, you probably needed a domain controller. And a domain controller, we'll just call DC, and that's for user account credentials, so user authentication and usernames and passwords, all that kind of stuff. And sometimes if the server was big enough, we would also put DHCP on here as well. We would put DNS on there, and we would also put DHCP. And if you're not familiar with what these are, I'm going to go in through them in a little bit. But DNS is, you know what, let's just do that now. DNS is a server application that maps domain names to IP addresses. So whenever you go visit a server, you don't want to have to remember the IP address of the server, right? You would prefer to remember it by server 1 or web server or something like that that has a name. It's just like all your friends. You probably don't memorize all your friends and family's phone numbers. You probably memorize their names or know their names, and that's how you would reach them in your contacts directory on your phone. DNS is the same concept. DHCP is a service that offers IP addresses to machines as they come online. It's Dynamic Host Configuration Protocol, and it assigns an IP address and domain name server and default gateway and all that kind of stuff to computers as they boot up to the network for the first time. And it's kind of, helps with auto configuration of hosts, or at least auto configuration of network details for computers to be able to access network resources and things like that. So anyway, you might have a couple services consolidated on this server for that. So the domain controller functions, DNS and DHCP, but that by far is one of the most multi-service servers I can think of that I deployed back then, right? And then we also had another server that you would have had running at the same time. You would have had email. And, the thing is that all of these services have different requirements. Like the email server, it needed certain, service packs installed and drivers installed and things like that. And here's the thing. For all of these servers back in the day, I had to deploy like the RAID drivers first, and this was all on floppy disk. It was a painstaking process, right? And then after you deployed the RAID drivers, you would have to set up the boot image and all that, and then you would you would want to deploy them in a, that's what RAID is. It'll deploy the disks in a redundant fashion, and then you install the OS and then update any drivers as necessary, that kind of thing. But this is just the basics right here. If you had any other applications like Blackboard or any of those other school applications, you would need more and more servers, okay, for each of those. And because they had different, requirements, some of them may be able to run on top of Windows NT, some of them may be require a Unix or Red Hat or Linux or Cent, any number of things. Another common network OS back then was Novell NetWare. So if you were using like any of those services, you would have had to use a different server, okay? And these are different physical servers back then. So each thing you needed, it just added up and added up. And here's the thing. Originally, whenever we did this, we were only using, you would do this install and you would provision it for, let's say, this domain controller here. Maybe it's got 2 80 gig hard drives, which in today's standards is not much, okay? And actually thinking back, I'm thinking like 4 gigs, and yeah, like that long ago, like 4 gigs would have been a big deal, right? And so, you would provision with those services, and then that would be it. Nobody really liked adding anything to critical services, because since that Windows OS was tailored, or that Red Hat OS was tailored to that software, you wanted to support that one application or those couple applications. By far the most, multi-used server would have been the domain controller, which did DNS and DHCP. All these other servers would have had a single application typically on it that ran for the environment, and then that was it. And if you wanted a new server, you had to buy a new physical machine. And so there was some studies done, and I'm going to go through this later, but there was some studies done basically saying that we were grossly overusing or underusing the amount of processing power and compute power and memory power and hard drive power that we were purchasing. And this wasn't just for schools, this was for everybody. Because you didn't want to interfere with the other services that you already had configured. You didn't want to mess up anything, right? You wanted it to work and to be redundant and to not really interfere with things. And actually, redundancy wasn't even a huge factor back then. You may have had a couple things redundant, but you didn't look for redundancy on everything. And so anyway, this is one type of virtualization. This is server virtualization. And really the concept is as simple as taking all of these servers and maximizing, let's just say I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We'll say this is just S1, S2, and S3. And so these are 8 machines. Now, historically, these probably would have been 10% utilization each, max. And I mean 10% on hard drive, 10% on processor, 10% on memory, all of those things, because you size these for a lot of growth. Servers were sized for unbelievable amounts of growth that was never realized because nobody wanted to, interop applications, and, each application had its own requirements and its own set of rules and standards. And so if you were to add this up, you get 10, 20, 30, 8 machines, it's 80%. So why not just buy one box, why not buy one box and turn it into a VM and then let it run at 80% utilization? That is the purpose. Put all of these applications on this one server. Whoops. If you were to do that and be able to do that successfully, then it could run at 80% utilization and be one server instead of 8. Think of the cost reduction of that. Just the sheer man hours of unboxing 8 machines and setting them up versus one. Or just the sheer man hours of configuring all those parameters on all those 8 different machines versus one. There's so much there, it's ridiculous. I'm going to talk more about this in just a moment and explain why virtualization is now the de facto standard in enterprise environments. Coming right up.
Start with new learning now.